I found out this week that my TED Talk about anxiety is potentially a very dangerous and harmful message, or at least that's what I was told by someone online. Now, if I had £1 for every time someone had told me what I'm saying is dangerous, well, I'd have about £3 if I'm honest. It's not that common that I get told that. But a wise person once said that the effectiveness of our communication is measured not in what's said, but in what is understood. So in this video, I'm going to be going into the trenches and tackling head-on criticism about my particular anxiety message and attempting to clarify a couple of points. This should be interesting. If you're new to this channel, then the first thing you need to know is that I'm Tim Box, I'm a hypnotherapist and mind coach, and for the last 13 years or so, I've been working with people to help them overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping them get control of anxiety. I gave a TED Talk in 2019 because I realized that there was a vital message that needed to be out there about how we over-pathologise our emotional responses and how when we label anxiety as an illness, we potentially just make anxiety worse. If you haven't seen this video, then I'll link it in the description, and I strongly recommend watching it before you watch this video, as it'll help you understand the points being made and the elements of the talk I'm referencing. But assuming you've done that, I'm going to be talking about a message I got about the talk that outlined a number of potential criticisms, suggesting this was a dangerous message to have out there. Now, I won't go through every sentence of this, but I'm going to bullet point the arguments made and address them one at a time. And the first one was this. So this is exactly the problem when it comes to the modern attitude to anxiety. The idea that anxiety and an anxiety disorder are somehow separate things, and that talking about anxiety, the natural, normal, healthy emotion, is to speak of something completely different to anxiety disorders. So here's the thing. Every single anxiety disorder started with the person involved becoming highly anxious for a reason. It's always based on an experience, a piece of learning, and our emotional reaction to it. Even when we aren't consciously aware of why we started to feel quite so highly anxious, there's still always a reason. In nearly all of the cases I've seen over the last decade or so, the problem then is what Dr. Claire Weekes would have referred to as the second fear. We start to feel anxious about how anxious we feel, thus setting up a feedback loop that exaggerates and exacerbates our anxiety response. This fear of anxiety itself is often fueled by receiving an anxiety disorder diagnosis. Now, that diagnosis didn't come from a blood test or a brain scan. It came from describing to a mental health professional the way you feel from moment to moment, and that person then deciding what label fits that description. But of course, as soon as we pathologise our emotional responses and label them as some type of malfunction, we potentially turn everyday anxiety into much more. Treating anxiety as an emotion rather than an illness diffuses the perceived threat it offers and puts things back in perspective and us back in control. Now, in the TED Talk, I discussed the idea that going to the doctor for a medical solution doesn't necessarily make sense because anxiety is not a medical condition. The counter-argument being that it is, and it requires medication to manage. Let's be clear here. When you go to the doctor to discuss what you perceive to be symptoms of anxiety, the doctor won't test you for anxiety. They'll run lots of tests to rule out any actual medical condition that could be causing the things you're currently experiencing, and then they might offer the conclusion that by a process of elimination, your physical sensations are caused by anxiety. This does not mean you've now tested positive for anxiety. You've actually tested negative for everything. Yes, the doctor may offer you medication to help, but again, it's worth noting that no doctor I've ever spoken to about this has suggested that medication is the answer. It's offered to manage the way you feel as you go through whatever process is required to get you the other side of this issue. In that respect, and I want to be really clear here, meds can be of great value to certain people at certain times. However, even when we're taking meds that are really helping, they're not the solution because they're not directly addressing the problem, which is the emotional response, not the physical one. The reason we feel anxiety as a physical sensation is not because it's a medical issue, but because the mind-body connection means that every thought we have will in some way affect our body. There's a reason why anxieties can feel so physically impacting, and it's not because it's a medical illness. It's because of the fight-flight response. Which leads us neatly on to the next point that was made. Now, I get that feeling all those horrific physical sensations in our body can very much make us think that something other than a healthy or normal response is going on. The sensations themselves can feel alarming. But in truth, the way we feel in those moments is entirely healthy and completely normal. Have you ever had a loud noise go off unexpectedly in your vicinity? Or perhaps a friend has jumped out from around the corner to frighten you? What happened then? Your heart went from the usual 60-ish beats per minute to about 120 in an instant. Your mind hit the panic response and triggered the release of adrenaline. You basically went into fight or flight. This is normal. This is healthy. It passed as soon as you realized you weren't actually under threat. The reason we feel unpleasant physical sensations when we're doing nothing more dramatic than just going about our day-to-day business is not because that physical response is malfunctioning, but because we are perceiving constant threat. And we're living in that fight or flight response. This is very often simply because we are worried about our physical or mental well-being due to the fact that anxiety itself has become the big threat in our mind. Again, the second fear. So this response is not a malfunction. Your brain and body are creating the appropriate response to perceived threat. The only problem is that your mind has mistaken anxiety for a threat and as a result is now constantly on high alert for the signs of it. Why would your mind make this mistake? Maybe because it was told that anxiety is an illness. Here's the next point that was made. At some point during the talk, I referenced not being a fan of medicating anxiety. As I've already mentioned in this video, meds aren't addressing the problem and many don't get on with them. However, if I'd had another 30 seconds available in the talk, I might also have mentioned that meds have helped many people bridge the space between where they are and where they needed to be. I'm not discouraging people from getting meds when they feel they're needed. However, rather than discouraging getting help, what I'm actually doing is encouraging people to seek the right help rather than blindly going down a particular road without questioning if it's the right road for them. The whole point of the talk is to help people realize that they're not locked into a particular set of responses just because they've been given a diagnosis. And whereas we might previously have felt helpless to do anything but manage our anxiety disorder, there's actually a lot more we can do about getting the other side of this completely, simply by shifting our understanding of what anxiety actually is. The medical path is often presented as the only real option, and it can feel like a fairly hopeless one. But the fact is that that just isn't the case. Here's the final point that was made. It was suggested that whilst I talk about not fearing anxiety, really we should be talking about not fearing diagnosis, for the reason that getting a diagnosis is the first step towards understanding what's going on and being able to seek help. My question to that is, why do we need a diagnosis before we seek help? Who decided we need to label the way we feel as a malfunction before we can seek to change it? I absolutely agree that the message being put out should be realize that help is available. But why do we need the label of disorder before we take our mental health and emotional well-being seriously enough to do something about it? The very reason people come to see me is because they're aware that their anxiety levels are reaching heights that scare them. Do we really need to label this as a disorder before we understand what steps need to be taken to change the response? With the work I do, I certainly don't need to know anything more than how you're currently feeling. We can work from there. No diagnosis necessary. Now, I can see why some might struggle to accept a different perspective on anxiety, and it'd be easy for me to dismiss the few voices of disagreement as people just failing to understand my message properly. But as I said at the start of the video, the effectiveness of our communication is measured not in what's said, but in what's understood. So, I hope I've managed to clarify my message a little in this video. However, it's also worth saying that what gets understood will inevitably be shaped by our current belief systems. The person that has accepted their role as someone with an anxiety disorder will inevitably have a different perspective than the person that's got the other side of theirs and helped other people do the same. So I realise I might very much be asking people to open their mind to a possible new perspective. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but in this, as in so many cases, it's inevitably the most rewarding. If you haven't seen the TED Talk, then check it out. Also, whilst we're thinking about shifting our perspective on anxiety, take a look at the next video where I talk a little bit more about some of the assumptions we make about anxiety and how we might change them.